All right, guys, we are back. I'm the Diesel, Captain. I have Lelouch V with me and King of the Comics Professor E, Ethan Murphy with me. We're doing the second part of our our character arc series. We're getting into flat arcs now. The first one kind of ran a little bit longer than we thought it would, which is perfectly fine. We had a great discussion. But the second part, we're getting into flat arcs. For the people watching that aren't aware what a flat arc for a character or characters actually is, I guess we'll start with Ethan, since you're the writing expert. Can you explain what a flat arc is for our fans?
So now I sound like a pompous asshole. But basically, what I'll say for a flat character arc is where the character, if Otis described it before in our last episode, how a character goes from point A to point Z, and they change in some way, either for the better or the worse. A flat arc is where the character starts off at point A, and by the end of the story, they're still at point A. Now, typically what happens is because they don't change, the world around them or the characters around them do change in response to them. They are the catalyst that causes the change.
So from your opinion, would you say a flat arc isn't necessarily a bad thing?
No, it's definitely not a bad, necessarily a bad thing. There are plenty of examples of flat arc characters in great movies. One of my favorite movies of all time, Otis and I's favorite movie, Shawshank Redemption, Andy Dufresne is very much a flat arc character. And you see it the most in the way the prison changes and the way that Red changes, his best friend changes around him. Another example, of course, is something like Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Z again. Goku, in my opinion, is 100% a flat arc character. I know he does grow as a stronger fighter, but his personality and his drive from the beginning stays. Even his IQ
from Dragon Ball to now, he is the same person.
Dragon Ball to the fight with Granola, he's pretty much the same character. So.
Fair enough. So then, a question I would have I'll propose this to Otis. Then, would you just argue that a flat arc character is just a plot device in a sense, just like a roided up plot device?
Yes and no. So I mean, flat arc characters usually dictate the plot. Like whatever they want becomes what the story is about, and that can either go really well or really bad. Like I mean, it's not necessarily like One Punch Man is a flat arc character, right? And One Punch Man is pretty dope. I really enjoy that show. Another example, I honestly consider Luffy a flat arc character.
Oh yeah, he's 100% flat arc. Yeah,
I haven't watched enough yet to know, so I can't say.
Yeah, like I mean, he doesn't change. He changes the world. That is what Luffy does. Like he puts his stamp on everything that he does. Everywhere he goes, he is remembered and beloved there. Like he changes the world. The world doesn't really change Luffy. It just makes him say, "Okay, I need to get stronger."
Right. Yeah. And oftentimes you'll see, especially for example, One Piece, you do see in flashbacks or whatnot when they were a younger character and when they had to grow or change or learn some lessons, some life lessons to become who they are. But by the time the story starts, from the time the story starts where the character is in the real time, if that character doesn't change in some way or grow in some way, that is a flat arc character. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing by any means. There are plenty of great examples of that. I would even argue that traditionally, back in the day, Professor Xavier was a flat arc character in the comics and in the anime series back in the day. And the characters that changed around him were his students. That was the whole point. And oftentimes mentor characters are flat arcs. Yeah.
So a question I would have then: what would you consider a bad flat arc character? Because if the criteria is that the world is changing around them. If the world's not changing and they're not the ones making it, like what is your perspective on a bad flat arc character? Or do you have an example of one?
Say it, Otis. Say it. I know it's right there. Say it.
No, you go ahead. You got this.
It's Neo from the Matrix sequels. This Matrix sequels, more so 2 and 3. Not even. I don't even know if you would count 4 at all, but mainly 2 and 3. He doesn't change or know what to do.
Don't do it. Don't.
4.
Don't trigger him.
I know. I lost that bet, but yeah, Neo is one of the biggest examples because he's a character who has all the power but has no idea what to do with it. Literally, he has no idea what to do with it, and he's walking around confused most of the time.
So then I'd question that again, going into, well, I guess we probably consider Goku a bad flat arc character, correct?
No, I think he's a great flat arc character. because he does affect, because one of the biggest defining characteristics of Goku is the people he fights end up becoming his friends and working alongside him. And as a young viewer myself, when I was back in the day when I was a kid, I watched that thinking, yo, that's cool. If you're able to turn your enemy into your friend, what a great lesson. What a great thing to do.
So I'm trying to think about a character in particular that has that sense of an uncontrollable power or personality trait that they just don't have a control over, whether it's like somebody with Tourette's or something like that, but they're not changed. I'm looking at we have the best. We've talked about the best. I'm looking into the worst plot arc characters. And for me, the reason I call it a plot device, I can't think of too many bad flat arc characters off the top of my head. Y'all probably have more because you're a little bit more distinguished with the grays. But I'm trying to think.
So as opposed to thinking about a specific character, Dev, it can also just be in general how poorly it can go. I mean, like anything when you're writing, there's plenty of pitfalls you can fall into. But if you have it where you're trying to tell a compelling story, trying to get people emotionally invested in a story, but the character themselves isn't growing or changing or learning, that's a problem. Especially if it's like for a show, a TV show or something like that. If the character is bizarrely obnoxious and stubborn, and that's the main character we're following behind, it's kind of like, why am I following this character? This character themselves is too stubborn or rigid in their own ways. It's a turnoff. Think about in your own personal life. If you have a friend or someone that you ask them over and over again to do something for you, and they refuse, they never do it, they never change or any way, you're like, you're gonna stop hanging out with that person. So it's kind of the same way with a character. Oftentimes a character arc or a flat arc character won't work if the character has no ambition, has no drive, and the people around them are almost only affected in a negative way, and the audience watching them doesn't like them. You can have a negative character or a negative character arc if the audience is on board with that person. But if you have a negative character that the audience doesn't like and they don't change, they're not gonna start liking them all of a sudden later on.
So from the description you had, to me, from my hearing it sounded like Saitama a lot. That's a character, at least from my perspective, me watching the show. He's just like walking along, just living life. Like he doesn't really have an overarching goal that he wants. He's kind of just doing stuff. Granted, the people in the world are kind of, I feel like, more indifferent on him. They're kind of like curious about him. Obviously, Genos is more like, and that's his master from his perspective. But I feel like majority of the characters in that world, at least as far as I've gone watching the anime, are kind of indifferent on him. Yet that is a successful anime that people enjoy watching. What do you think is the differentiation between that and then what you described? But I guess that's a question for Otis, I feel like, because he probably has more thoughts on that. Correct? Or am I wrong?
Yeah. So I mean, the reason why One Punch Man works is because, for one, he does have a goal. His goal is to find a challenge, and he goes through different, maybe if I'm a hero, I'll find a challenge. Nope. Maybe if I go fight some martial artists, I'll find a challenge. Nope. Maybe if I fight these monsters, I'll find a challenge. Nope. Just a repeated thing for him. But the growth really comes from all the characters around him. Like Genos grows so much as a character. You see, what is the guy with the baseball bat?
Oh my god!
But
he's like a computer too.
I haven't watched anime in forever, so I couldn't even tell you names outside of Genos and Saitama.
Bottom line, the characters around him develop because of their interactions with Saitama. And
especially his villains, the people who he fights actually grow. And so part of it too, Dev, is not just, I'm not trying to say a lot, Dev, but part of it is it's not just the idea that the flat art character has no goals or has no motivations. It's just that they start off with that same motivation and it doesn't change by the end of the story. They're in the same place by the end. Saitama 100% wants to find a worthy opponent, but he damn sure doesn't find one by the end of the story, which is part of the humor, which is why it works so well, so to speak.
So then looking at a character, I think probably more of a force of nature character, somebody like a Majin Buu, where they're just living their life and things happen to them and things come to them. They're not developing really too much. They're kind of just interacting with things as they come to them. At least the fat Buu, like pure Buu, not the obviously the evil, well, part of him too, but Boo in general, that's an example of, to me, of a character where it's a force of nature. And you have characters like that in different parts of fiction in which they're just a force of nature, rather that's a kaiju or a spirit to some extent, sometimes people, where they're just there and they want to be left, like the Hulk in a sense. He just wants to be left alone. With a character like that, would you consider that a good flat arc, even though their motivation is they just want to be left alone and live their life?
So with Majin Buu, honestly, if we're talking about Fat Buu, I don't consider that a flat arc character. Cause seeing like where Buu was when he first came about, like him just whimsically killing people and turning them to candy and eating people, to like making the full turn, like trying to save Hercule and legit actually being a hero. Like that's not one I would call flat. Another character.
You could say Kid Buu because he's basically Id. Sure, he's Id, but yeah.
I'm more so thinking about Buu from like the Buu saga on, because obviously during the Buu saga, like he had that development, but it felt like since the Buu saga, he's just been at Hercule's house or just around Hercule, just chilling, and he'll do things when like Beerus comes to Earth and takes his pudding or some shit, but he's really just around there chilling, just eating food, just living essentially.
I mean, after losing the Beerus, like Buu went and trained. Like he trained hard. He was supposed to be in the Tournament of Power. They just left him out.
Yeah,
fair enough. True.
And oftentimes the not all the characters in a story can grow or change. I mean, one of the things that people talk about with Game of Thrones so much is how they have so many. It's an ensemble cast, and in some way or another, all the characters are influenced and do grow and change. But that's not the usual. That's not how things usually unfold. It's also only done in long form storytelling. Typically, with like a movie or whatnot, you can only have room for one or two main character arcs, essentially. So it depends on how much time you have to grow multiple characters and change multiple characters. Think about this too, Dev. One of our favorite shows, again, going back to Avatar: The Last Airbender. What would you say is the arc of Toph Beifong?
Toph Beifong, when I'm thinking of her arc, I more so think of like softening, for lack of a better term. Like her whole thing is that she has walls built up and defenses where she doesn't really like people like that. She doesn't really like let her emotions out to others around her. She's kind of self-kept and again, almost like a force of nature character in a sense, but she wants to be unapologetically her and be left alone in a sense, from my perspective. And then over time, she obviously builds a relationship with the team and becomes more vulnerable with them over time, like kind of letting them know things about her that she did let anybody else know besides her.
I mean, but look where she ends up in
Korra. It's like, did she grow or change? And that's kind of like, thinking about it, it's like, in a way, she's kind of a flat arc character. But it's fine. It works well. But she's kind of a flat arc character. Also, Iroh, from the point of when Avatar: The Last Airbender starts, Iroh doesn't really change or grow either. I mean, we don't think about that because we love him. We love where he is, but he's pretty much set where he is at the beginning of that story up through Korra. So you can have a great character that is a flat arc character because they don't necessarily need to change. In the story, they don't, like Otis said, they don't dictate the story. They're fine being what they are. You can have another character that does.
So obviously they can be in the story. Because again, from my perspective, I look at it like a plot device. Do you think them being like a character like a Toph or Uncle Iroh, them being the main character and like the driving force behind a narrative, do you think that could be indicative of a good story in general? If they were the main focus of a story?
It could be. There are plenty of stories. I'm sorry, Otis, you say something, I'm going to cut you off.
Good.
Have you guys seen the movie Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal?
I haven't yet, no.
I won't get into too many spoilers, but Otis knows that is very much a flat arc. Jake Gyllenhaal's character is very much a flat arc character. He has his whole objective from the beginning is to actually have some kind of success as a videographer or working in the news industry, essentially. And his morals are very sparse. Yeah. And he doesn't really change. He finds success, but he doesn't change or grow or learn his lessons, or it's like he's pretty much the exact same person, same being from the beginning to the end, and it's still a very compelling story, even though and you see how he is, because he's a flat arc character, and he's kind of in a grander sense, he's more negative or more borderline evil. You see how it affects the world around him.
So would that be, is that a villain thing or like an antagonist type thing?
Kind of.
'Cause I'm looking, especially when it comes to superheroes, I'm looking at somebody like a good superhero villain being Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin. He's obviously a villain, and he stays a villain throughout the progression of his show and up into the new stuff he's in. And granted, it seems like his motivations don't necessarily change. I think he has like Otis said, he has different goals, like having is it Sophia or I can't remember the name of his wife. Vanessa. He obviously wants to protect her, and that's a goal he has, but that need to amass power and wealth still are a constant for him.
So if you're going with the Daredevil show on Netflix, he does change. He goes from being an island to a man that wants to be in a relationship, to the point where he's willing to go to prison as long as Vanessa is safe. Because I think it's correct me if I'm wrong, Otis. He kind of gives Daredevil gives him like an ultimatum, like we will basically allow Vanessa to be fine and safe if you go to prison. And he's like, okay, fine, that's a trade. I'll take it, essentially. So he does actually grow. However, there are plenty of other villains, Dev, that do, that 100%, because like, again, in the comic books especially, once Willie Fisk is established as a kingpin, he doesn't really need to grow or change at all. But we're seeing him from the beginning of the story with Spider-Man or what have you, or Daredevil, way when in the comic books. So he's already had his growth period. When he was in prison, his dad abandoned him in prison. He actually had to go through that change and everything. By the time we see him and meet him, he's gone through those changes. He is who he is now, and we're seeing him just as an established character.
Yeah, that's great. Having the conversation, I understand a lot where y'all are coming from with that. For me, I do enjoy flower characters. Obviously, the characters we talked about were characters that from content that we all enjoy, especially Uncle Iroh. For me, it's still tough not to see them as just a plot device on steroids. Just due to the fact in all these instances we talked about with these characters, all these characters have been used as a device to help the progression of the main protagonist, rather than be evil or not. And even just to affect the world in the sense to change the status quo. I'm sorry. Yeah, the status quo of the world. Which is, it's not a bad thing, obviously. It's just my perspective and how I would describe. Going forward, if I would describe a flat art character, I'd probably still look at them just a really souped up plot device for a story.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. And I think it does fall into how deft the hands are of the writer and storyteller or storytelling team, essentially, if they can make that work. Sometimes they can't. There are plenty of examples, of course, where it doesn't work, having a character with and it may even be indeliberate, where the writer or writers or team behind the film or book or what have you, they are unaware of the fact that their character isn't growing or changing in any kind of notable way. And if that's the case, it does fall flat. But oftentimes if they do have a character that's a flat arc, they will do what they can to make the world around them change. I would argue, being topical, that Kratos in the first 3 games of God of War doesn't really change. He has the growth period he has was at the very beginning when he was bamboozled by Ares. And after that, he's pretty much a wrecking machine from point A to point A. He doesn't really change. It's not till point A to point A. It's not till Dad of War or Beard of War he actually becomes like, oh, this dude actually has changed a lot. So.
All right. Well, before we close out, are there any last thoughts or remarks you guys have on the topic?
No, flat art character can either be good or bad. If you get tropey, you're probably gonna end up bad. If you are deliberate in making them the driving force of the world, it can be good. Bottom line.
I completely agree.
Well, guys, thank you for tuning in again. This has been ASMR Charlie. This has been the second part of the flat arc, or just the character arc discussion. Again, if you guys have any thoughts on what videos you guys want from us going forward, as far as narrative discussions when it comes to things of that nature, let us know in the comment section. If you like these videos, again, let us know in the comment section. We appreciate your support. We hope for your continued support, and we will see you guys next time. This is the Then and Now Podcast. Peace.